talking about ruminants and the idea of their specialized gastrointestinal tract and how they have that rather large anaerobic chamber, essentially called the rumen. And the idea that because some of the microbes in that rumen are producing methane, they're methanogens. And so that's where they make the claim that, cattle produce a lot of methane. It's really the microbes in them, the methanogens. I was thinking about that a little bit, and this is another idea. There's been a push of maybe we should just not have so many cattle on that we're raising as part of our agricultural system. And dairy, of course, dairy cows are a big part of that. And this is a company, they used to be called MooFree. Now they've been renamed to Perfect Day. But this is a company, a startup company that is looking at manufacturing milk from using yeast. So they're genetically engineering yeast to produce all the proteins and fats that you find in milk. They claim milk, it really isn't that complicated when you look at its chemical makeup. It's sugars and proteins and a few other things, mostly water. And they're claiming that it takes 1,000 liters of water to just produce 1 liter of milk. So one angle, of course, is the sustainability of this, that this is more sustainable than having and raising dairy cows. And so they are in the early stages. I think they might have limited release, but I think it's all over in California currently. I haven't seen anything locally or online really, but they're claiming they're going to expand into not only producing milk, but of course like yogurt and things like that. But it's all done from using yeast as the workhorse, so to speak, to make all the milk products. What do you think? Would you drink something like that? I suppose you have to like the taste of milk to begin with. They claim it tastes just like milk, like dairy milk. Like you can't tell the difference. They're two people who started this company, they're vegans. And so they were not really jazzed by all the milk alternatives that are currently out there, like, almond milk or coconut milk. And so they said, why don't we try to make something that more people would drink besides just vegans if it actually tastes like milk. And maybe that would help reduce water use and just be more sustainable. So look for that. I don't know if it's technically called MooFree or if they're going to have a different label, but the company is called Perfect Day. So look for that. See if they get into a wider market. All right. Not that one. I think we left off here. So when you look at how cattle are naturally eating, because of the rumen and all the microbes in there, they're really quite efficient at breaking down food that has high cellulose content. So remember, it's not really them doing that. They don't have the cellulase enzyme themselves. They're relying on all the microbes to do this for them. Now with current agricultural practices, some cattle are not raised that way. They're not on pasture where they can just graze, the different grasses out there. They are put into feedlots that are essentially just soil or probably more like dirt. And then they're given food in troughs. And it's usually high protein food, but that's not their normal diet that they evolved to eat. And so very often you'll see, if you look on any of the feed provided in that way, it's been altered. They'll do this procedure where they cross-link the proteins in the feed, which is treating sometimes with formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. were banned, by the way, when we moved into what's now called Weston Hall. The OSHA banned us from having any formaldehyde in that building. So before we could move in, we had to get rid of, it's pretty common in science that we used to pickle, lack of a better word, pickle things in formaldehyde. That's how we would preserve them. And so we had to switch everything into ethanol, and it's against the law
Where did you guys have labs prior to this?
here.
Oh.
Yeah, West Science used to be where biology was located. And but we didn't have like what we have there now. Like we only had teaching labs here. We didn't have research labs or so when I came in, they were just building Weston. And so I was very excited to see that we'd actually have research labs and teaching labs and a greenhouse. So, but anyways, yeah, we had to get rid of everything that was formaldehyde based. And so not pleasant to think about. But anyways, the reason they're doing that is that it allows for the protein that the cows eat to get further into the gastrointestinal tract and get down into the lower portions, and then it can get broken down. And so it's just a trick that they're doing to be able to feed this kind of food to the cattle and have it actually get absorbed to some level. But that's not really how they evolved to eat. And so there's, that's a big shift. And luckily, because they have so many microbes in their gastrointestinal tract, as well as in their, all the way, not just the rumen, of course, they have microbes all throughout their gastrointestinal tract. It's just that the rumen is a special extra compartment. And so all of those microbes that are part of the entire gastrointestinal tract are kind of like, you can think of it kind of like a buffer system where if their food does shift like that from hay to more of a protein-based food, often the presence of the microbes can help them adjust because the microbes are capable of adjusting much more quickly than the cattle or cow, and they're able to, help with that transition. But it's still a problem. You can't just dramatically shift. If you know anyone who raises cows or cattle, whether it be for meat or dairy, you can't just on a dime switch their diet because that can create big problems. And so, for example, in the spring, when they've been fed hay all winter in a place like this where there's definite snow on the ground and they get switched to hay, then as the snow melts and you have this beautiful fresh grass and you just throw them out onto the pasture, that's a really abrupt shift for them, believe it or not. And it can cause problems with the microbes present, especially in the rumen. And what tends to happen then is, if you've ever heard of the condition called bloat, that is really the methanogens overpopulating, their population shifts too high, and you get excess production of methane gas. And it causes essentially the rumen to, blow up like a balloon. It can actually asphyxiate the cow. It ends up pressing so hard on their ability with their diaphragm that they can't breathe and they can die. And as far as I know, last time I talked to a veterinarian, which was a couple of years ago about this, but as far as I know, the way they still treat this in an emergency situation is they puncture right through the side of the cow, right into the rumen with like a hollow tube and just let the gas escape. Does that sound right? So I've seen a video of it and it's quite dramatic, but it can work to save the cow or cattle. But yeah, that can be certainly an emergency situation. So you try, of course, not to have that happen to the cattle that you're trying to raise. And so having some thought into how you transition their food is important. If you think about cattle that end up on feedlots, or even if you are in a dairy operation or cattle operation where you introduce too much grain, where normally they're fed on hay, but then you start, putting in grain. One of the issues they've noted is that you can get Streptococcus bovis, which is in their intestinal tract. Their populations soar because they feed off the grain very well. And they've done some case studies where they can see really high levels of this particular microbe in the gastrointestinal tract. And it's just because you've essentially selected for them by switching the cow onto grain. The Streptococcus love that food, and they're very efficient at breaking that down. And so you get this imbalance, this dysbiosis in the gastrointestinal tract. And you also, Streptococcus, they often produce lactic acid as part of their waste products. And that is an acid, right? So they're breaking down starch, they're using it for their own needs, which is primarily to get ATP. One of the waste products is lactic acid. They don't need that. That's not what they're going for. So they just excrete that out. And then the rumen and the gastrointestinal tract, it starts to acidify. And the normal microbes that are used to a more mild pH start to die off. So, it's kind of like this domino impact where the Streptococcus populations go way up. They produce too much acid. That starts to shift the pH. Now a bunch of other microbes are starting to get killed off by that. And then that results in this disease called acidosis. And that's another issue where if it progresses, it can cause death. And so again, this idea of understanding the rumen and the gastrointestinal tract and how to keep the microbes inside the cattle happy so that they're supporting the cattle and not getting out of control and going through a dysbiosis event is really important when you're raising cattle. So why do they do this? Grain, they found out if you feed cattle grain, especially for meat production, it allows them to gain weight very quickly. It tenderizes the meat while they're still alive, and so that you can get the cattle to market quicker. The meat is higher quality for what humans like. Humans don't like really tough, low-fat meat in general. We tend to like the marbling of the fat in the meat. So if you can get the cattle put on weight better, get better quality, you get a higher price, but you still have that issue of acidosis. So if you are not careful about that, you can end up with quite a bit of loss due to acidosis disease. So it's not just the rumen, like I said, you have to think about the entire gastrointestinal tract going through a dysbiosis. If you start to have too much acidification all the way, through the gastrointestinal tract, another thing that they noted, especially lower down in the large intestine, is that you get acid showing up there as well. And then E. coli, some strains of E. coli are acid tolerant. And so then they're like, yeah, that doesn't bother me that the pH is dropping. I'm fine. And so their competitors are getting wiped out. They're tolerant of it. So then their populations start to go up and you get too much E. coli in the lower intestine. Well, some of those acid tolerant E. coli are the O157H7 variety of E. coli. You may have heard about that in just regular media. That's the kind that can kill humans if you get a high enough dose of that, especially if you're very, very young or very, very old, you're more susceptible, especially there's been deaths of children, toddlers, when they eat hamburger that is laced with E. coli, this version of E. coli. Now, we have billions of E. coli in us right now that are just totally fine and they're working for us, but there are strains that can make you very, very sick or kill you. So why should we worry about that? That's in the cow, right? We're like, well, it's too bad for the cow, but that's not us. But the problem is if these cows or cattle, more of the cattle idea, if they are sent to the slaughterhouse and slaughtered and they're not done, and that's not done properly, you get the E. coli contaminating the meat that gets slaughtered and the meat products that gets packaged up. And that's typically how this version of E. coli ends up in the food. It's through the process of processing the meat at the slaughterhouse and then getting it packaged up. And so if you can, if you do eat meat and you've gone to the store and bought different types of red meat, there's the idea of buying like a steak or, something like that versus ground beef, where you have the strings of meat that have been ground. And then if you can imagine that both of those, let's say steak versus ground beef, both of those end up contaminated with this version of E. coli. And, let's say you buy one of each, bring it home, you get your grill fired up and you put the steak on the grill. And as that one's cooking, you make the hamburger patties and then you put that on the grill. Can you imagine which version might be a little bit more dicey to eat if they're both contaminated? So, well, hopefully you've never had the experience of working in a slaughterhouse. My cousin did that for a while. And then when we'd meet for Thanksgiving dinner, he would regale us with what it's like to work in a slaughterhouse, just to make it so that we would lose our appetite. And then his mom would yell at him, "Stop talking about that," because it was disgusting. This was a long time ago. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe their ways of doing that is better now, but so when they cut meat for steak, it's just pretty much cutting the meat off a section of the cow and packaging it. If they take meat for hamburger, they take the meat and grind it and then package it. So which do you think has maybe some better surface area for E. coli to hang out and hide? Ground meat. So the ground meat, and then the other thing too, when you're at home and you take that ground meat, especially if you just buy like a chunk of ground beef, so you have to take it and make a patty out of it, right? So as you're doing that, if there's E. coli on the surface and then you make a patty, you're mixing the E. coli into the inner portion of the patty. So that if you throw that on the grill and you like your hamburger like well done or medium rare or whatever, the inside doesn't get fully cooked and E. coli can be lurking in there. So if I were to do that and I was worried, I'd pick a steak over, because at least with the steak, if E. coli is on the surface, you can kill that by the heat exposure it's going to get when you cook it up. Whereas with the ground beef, it's a little riskier. So just something to think about if you eat meat, that sometimes it's a roll of the dice when you eat hamburger. So unfortunately, there have been case studies where children have died from eating hamburger at fast food restaurant that was contaminated. There's a big famous case study out west at a hamburger joint. I'm blanking on the name of it wasn't McDonald's. I'm blanking on the company name, the fast food company. But body size, if you think about a young toddler, they're not very big. They don't weigh much. And so dose makes the poison. For their body size, just a little bit of E. coli like this can make you really, really sick. Whereas a human adult, you're likely to survive. Unless your immune system, so very, very young, very, very old. When you get older, your immune system starts to slide on you and it isn't as effective. So then that's why older people are at risk of a lot of different things that young people are not. So yeah, not a particularly good thing to think about, but it is something that we have to be mindful of. I was just on the CDC's website a couple of weeks ago, and there's fresh outbreaks of E. coli happening as we speak. So often it's on a variety of different things. It's not just meat. There's been cases of cantaloupe where, if you've ever bought a cantaloupe, the the rind is very wrinkly. And the E. coli will be on that. And then if you can imagine, what do you do when you buy a cantaloupe? You slice through it. And so taking the knife and slicing through, some E. coli gets into the flesh as you slice, kind of like if someone performs surgery on you and they don't really disinfect your skin before they cut. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's vegetables too, fruits, vegetables, leafy greens are a favorite target. That's one reason why I try to grow my own leafy greens. I use a hydroponic system at home, just little tabletop ones, because at least I know what's in that. So leafy greens, you tend not to cook those often. It's just you pick them, you wash them, and you eat them. And running water doesn't really get rid of E. coli. I think now you've been in this class, you understand that they can attach. Running water doesn't necessarily take care of that. So they can attach to things quite well. So anyways, yeah. So the CDC has a running list of case studies and outbreaks. They have the most current, up-to-date information on what's happening. There's been all kinds of recalls going on. And now I guess another issue is what heavy metals and cinnamon. I guess that's a thing right now. So yeah, I know. It's like, geez. So just be careful. You need to be informed on stuff like this, because like I ran across the cinnamon thing just kind of by accident, and it's like, oh, I didn't know about this. So that's why I went to the CDC's website and was looking into things. So try to keep up on that. So microbe animal, you could go on and on and on and on and on about all the different animals that have microbes. I just wanted to mention Dr. Lafferty's lab, her WECOS lab. One of her main research efforts is actually looking at the microbial ecology of wildlife and understanding that better. And she's kind of on the cutting edge of this. There's not that many scientists that are doing that. It's more focused on animals used in agricultural production, or humans, of course, because we're very human centric. We want to know about ourselves. But she's looking at this idea of understanding the microbial ecology, especially the microbiome in the gastrointestinal tract. And so if you this is off her website. And so she's looking at, how does the sex or the diets, the parasite load, their habitat, how does that all impact the microbiome? And then how does the microbiome impact the host organism? And, she's looking at it as a way to better inform management decisions on how to manage all this wildlife. Some of her students, this is the one that I have as an extra credit opportunity, that recording of her talk. And by the way, if you haven't handed in notes on that, you can still do that. There's no deadline on that. So if you haven't done that yet, feel free. Those of you who have watched the video, were you a little overwhelmed? So I just want to caution you, as I was listening, I zoomed in live when she was giving her talk. I know Riley and she's wonderful, but it was a massive project. It was massive. Like, this is more like PhD level, in my opinion. So I hope for those of you who might have watched this and are thinking on going to grad school, it's not necessarily like this. I mean, Riley did an excellent job. She knocked it out of the park, and it was a wonderful project, but it was a lot. So just be aware that it's often not like that. But she was looking at this idea. So if you haven't done the video on that for extra credit, feel free to do that. I was on Sierra's committee when she was here. She's gone now, but she was looking at black bear populations, and she teamed up with hunters for them to, if they killed a bear in the hunting season, to provide parts of the intestinal tract. So, if you think about looking at the microbiome of any animal, including humans, you can't just do surgery and say, what's in your small intestine? I want to see who's in there. Can't do that, obviously. So we rely on the feces to inform what's going on in the gastrointestinal tract, which isn't perfect, because it's like, well, the gastrointestinal tract is huge. And if you want to ask the question, where are these different microbes hanging out? Are they in the small intestine, large intestine? What's going on? You don't really know that. And so she was trying to get at that idea with hunting season. If the bears are killed anyways, could the hunters give portions of the intestinal tract that she could then extract and analyze? And so she did a really nice project. She was also looking at human provision foods. So she was looking at bait piles and so she was looking at what's in the bait pile, what kinds of foods. And I didn't know for bait piles, you can put pretty much anything you want in there. And so a lot of, from the hunter's perspective, they want to bait it with stuff that's really enticing for the bear, of course. And so it's a lot of junk food that people will put in that. And of course, obviously that's going to impact the microbiome. So she was considering that angle too, like how is that influencing? So anyways, there's efforts with microbe animal interactions. This is another one that was taking place up in Alaska that she was collaborating on, looking at brown bear gut microbiomes. So a lot of research is certainly going toward microbe human, but I just wanted to make you aware that there are, it's kind of cutting edge right now. There's not a ton of people doing this, but it's starting to get looked at more and more, where we're branching out from studying humans and looking at other animals. And then this one's from her website too, the spotted salamander, and looking at what's on their skin. And because they have a nice kind of mucus covering that's very protective. And with salamanders, having a very, very healthy barrier to their environments on their skin is very important. And so they're looking at what the microbiome is, who's there, and what are they doing? Are they helping the salamander survive threats, pathogens or other situations that they're exposed to through their skin? So lots of interesting work. And things are starting to branch out from looking at, initially, I think probably, like I said, probably the first microbiome was the termite gut way back when, and then it kind of faded off, but now it's back. There's a lot of different animals being looked at, and it should get more and more of that over the years here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to shift and just talk a little bit about the next topic, which is still looking at microbe animal, but now we're zooming into the human. Whoops. And so for those of you who have taken Gen Micro with me, general microbiology, that some of this will look familiar, and I like to cover it in this class too, because it's so important. And I think, when you truly, this information can help you tremendously as you live the rest of your life and even help those you love. This information can be vital to understanding yourself and your microbiome. And I am very excited about the research going on with human microbe interactions like this, because I think I feel very hopeful that we can improve human health and animal health with better understanding of this. And I don't know about you, but, preventative health seems a whole lot more attractive idea than getting sick and having to go to the doctor and then get put on prescription medication that has all these side effects. You ever listen to those side effects on the radio or TV? They hire people to talk really fast to get in all the side effects before the time is up on the ad. It's rather stunning. And so, being able to feel healthy and physically and mentally, and now they're realizing microbes do that for us. They help us stay physically healthy and mentally healthy and emotionally healthy. And so I think, if you don't get anything else out of this class, if you can use this information as you go and live your life, that will make it all worthwhile. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this, and I'll be adding, this is like a part one slide set. I'll be adding more. I'm updating the slide set with the more current information from the last couple of years. But basically, we are a super organism, and there used to be this idea that, and unfortunately it hit the news and media took it and ran with it. So adult humans have about 1 × 10⁻14 cells that make up our body, human cells, eukaryotic cells. And then there was this thing that came out and was published, and they said, oh, we're only 10% human cells. The rest are microbial. So that sounds pretty fantastic, right? 90% of what make us is not us, it's microbes. And so that was very, fantastic topic. So the media took that and ran with it, and it just went all over the place. And everyone started quoting this. And then finally someone went, where was that paper published? And they went and looked at it, and they looked at the experimental design, and they went, oh, this isn't that good of an experiment. And so they decided, let's actually do this experiment and figure this out. And so the new information that had a proper experimental design, good data analysis, the new information is that, they put it like this in the paper: a standard man weighing 70 kilograms has a ratio of 1.3 bacteria to every 1 human cell. So you can still say you're mostly microbial because it's over 1, it's 1.3. So I still can claim I'm mostly microbial, and so can you. All right. So I bought my nephew a t-shirt that said mostly microbe on for his birthday 1 year because he was into microbes. But anyways, so that's not quite as fantastic as the 90% idea, but it's definitely more accurate to what the experimental results were showing. Okay, now I love this quote where the human body represents a scaffold upon which multitudes of mutualistic and symbiotic species build residence, creating a diverse ecosystem composed of members of 5 of the 6 kingdoms of life. So we really are symbiotic with so many different microbes, and we are really a super organism. And that is not, I would wager, not what most people think about when they think about themselves, right? You're human, and you don't really think about microbes that hang out with you on a regular basis. But there's more of them in and on you than your own eukaryotic cells that you were born with and, came to adulthood with. So it starts right as actually their group of scientists are putting forth the idea that you are colonized even while you're still in the uterus of your mom. And so they used to teach that the uterus or the womb was sterile, but there have been some nice studies showing that there are microbes in the amniotic fluid and in the placental tissue that aren't pathogenic. We already know, it's not disputed, that there are some pathogens that can enter the mom and make it through the placenta to the developing fetus. They know about that, so it's possible. But they thought it was only pathogens that could do that, and they thought other normal microbes wouldn't. But some studies are showing that that could be true, and there's still some debate about this. Some scientists don't agree, and so just take this with a grain of salt, sand, whatever. But I read those papers, and it seems plausible to me that their studies seemed well done. And I mean, to me, it kind of makes sense that there would be some microbes there, considering how important they are for how we function right from a very young stage. Now, as soon as the mother goes into labor and the labor process, the baby is certainly getting colonized. And through the vaginal tract. If it's a vaginal delivery, there's all kinds of microbes there, so they're getting coated. They're eating some of it, aspirating some of it. So giving birth is not a nice, clean and tidy thing. And so there's plenty of microbes that will colonize the infant through the labor process. So that has given rise to a lot of studies of, well, what if the infant is not born vaginally? What if it's a C-section? And, with the amount of C-sections that have risen over the years, there's a lot of babies born that way. And the question they asked was, does that make a difference to the microbiome population? And so they've done some studies, of course, just looking at feces, they can't, that's the way to do it. And so they've done some nice studies where they take fecal samples from vaginal born babies versus C-section babies, and they could show a definite difference, especially early on. And they've also looked at that idea with breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, and they can see, again, a big difference between those two conditions, at least early on. And so there are some people who have enough of this knowledge that they've asked. I know some people that were pregnant in this day and age, and they asked their doctor the doctor said, you're going to have a C-section for whatever reason. And they said, well, then I'd like to coat my baby with some of the vaginal secretions of my body. And at least that doctor was like, absolutely not. They wouldn't allow it. And I think if from their perspective, they're worried about getting sued, because one of the things when you go into labor, they check to make sure that you don't have any pathogens in your vaginal tract. And because some like Streptococcus species can cause blindness to the baby, for example. And so they always screen you for that in the late stages of your pregnancy. And if you do have it, they'll put you on an IV antibiotic as you go into labor. And so they were worried about that, and they wouldn't let this person that I know do that. And so she ended up going to a different doctor, and that doctor said, yeah, that makes total sense, because that doctor had some training in the microbiome. And so, she was able to do that, and because she felt very strongly that that was an important step for her baby. So it's interesting. When I've had some discussions with some of the doctors, not too long ago, maybe 4 years ago, the doctor who is the doctor for my youngest son, and my youngest son was having gastrointestinal problems. And I said, maybe we should look at his microbiome. And the doctor looked at me and went, what's that? And I just went, oh my gosh, we haven't gone back to him since. So it's like he had no clue what I was talking about. And of course, I teach about this stuff. So, I know about it. And so I was just like, oh boy, okay. So we ended up going to a different doctor who actually embraced that idea. Yeah, so we ended up going to a different doctor who actually is like, absolutely, we should run a microbiome study, and so like, okay. And so we did that and got all this analysis back on all the microbes down to the genus level in my son's gastrointestinal tract. Don't let him know. If you ever meet him, don't tell him I'm talking to you about this. And he could point out, yep, these microbes are causing inflammation. These microbes are overpopulated, and then he said, this is what you should do. And, he gave some vitamins he was lacking in. You could tell from that too, with blood tests. So he did blood tests too. And then the microbiome, and then he put him on a special diet, and hey, my son got better. It was like night and day difference. And so it can be very useful information. And at least in my son's case, it's granted it's a sample size of 1 that I have experience with, but he went from not being able to go to school because he was so sick to back to almost fully normal within just a few weeks. So it can be very powerful, this information. So that's, why I'm asking you to really think about this carefully, even after this class is done. So lots of interesting data coming out, and they are definitely noticing, with like I said, the vaginal versus C-section, bottle fed versus breastfeeding. And so definitely the mother is the number one source of microbes for that baby initially, right? And so as you give birth, there are feces that are released. You can't help that. So you get, the baby will get, exposure through that too, as well as through the skin. The breast tissue itself has microbes in it. The breast milk has tissue in it. I mean, the breast milk has microbes in it, so as well as the surface skin. And so when the baby is breastfeeding, they get doses of microbes, and they're important because they help break down the milk. And so they need access to those microbes. So certainly then, of course, the home that mother and baby are in, any other partners, children, animals, the actual environment is important for influencing the microbiome of that child. And I was so happy when a paper came out saying you really shouldn't clean your house super clean all the time. Like, yes, thank you, because I rarely clean my house. And so, yeah, and so I felt like I could finally relax and not worry so much about that. And they said it's okay to have, dust bunnies around here and there. And it's good to have a cat and a dog, they found, for allergies for the children. It helps reduce allergies, something about the cat dog combination. So we made sure to do that. And so, and not having a super clean house is important. I'll talk to you more about that, why that's the case. But I didn't realize, I'm sorry, I got excited about all this and started talking too long here. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll